You know that feeling when you wake up, the alarm goes off, and before your feet even hit the floor, you just feel, well, off.
Oh, yeah, like a heavy sort of sluggishness.
Exactly, a heavy, undeniable brain fog. And, I mean, you haven't been out late, you're not visibly sick with a fever, but there's this deep tissue fatigue that, 3 cups of coffee can't even touch.
Right.
You might blame it on stress or aging or just a passing bug. But what if the culprit isn't your lifestyle at all? What if the very house you live in, the place where you are supposed to be the most safe and sheltered, is actually the thing secretly making you sick?
It's a really profound betrayal of our environment, honestly. And what makes it so insidious is how common it is, yet how rarely it's actually identified.
Because people just go to the doctor, right?
Exactly. People go to their doctors, they get the standard metabolic panels, CBCs, thyroid checks, and everything comes back quote unquote normal.
So they're just told, like, go get some more sleep.
Right? Sleep more, drink water, or maybe they get a prescription for an antidepressant because conventional medical practices rarely check for this specific environmental factor unless they are directly prompted by the patient.
Right.
So people are just left suffering from these low-grade, chronic, systemic issues for years. They're essentially flying blind.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. Because the invisible threat we are doing a deep dive on today is indoor mold exposure. And, I know the word mold immediately conjures up images of abandoned, dilapidated houses or disaster zones.
Yeah, totally. Flooded basements and things like that.
Right. But our mission for this deep dive is to look at the exact microbiology of what this organism is, how it secretly impacts human health, specifically through these microscopic chemical weapons called mycotoxins, and, the comprehensive steps required to detoxify both your home and your own tissues.
Which is such an important mission because knowledge is really only valuable when you can apply it. Understanding this hidden mechanism can be the ultimate aha moment for someone who is struggling with unexplained symptoms.
Yeah, I love that. So to understand the enemy, we have to look at the basic biology of what we're actually dealing with here, because mold has this fascinating dual identity. Out in the wild, it's nature's ultimate recycler.
It is.
But the moment it crosses our threshold and gets trapped indoors, its function completely changes.
Right. So at its biological core, mold is a fungus. And if we look at the evolutionary history of fungi, they serve a highly specialized, absolutely non-negotiable role on this planet, which is decomposing complex organic matter.
Like dead trees and stuff.
Exactly. Fungi possess the unique enzymatic machinery required to break down really dense materials like lignin and cellulose, the tough structural polymers in trees and plants.
Oh, wow, okay.
So if you walk through an old-growth forest, mold is doing the heavy lifting of breaking down fallen timber and dead foliage, turning those complex carbohydrates back into usable elemental organic matter for the soil microbiome.
It's just the circle of life out there.
It really is. And to do this efficiently across vast ecological distances, mold utilizes a mycelial network.
Which is sort of like a root system.
Yes, like a subterranean root system. And it reproduces by sporulating. So it sends millions of microscopic spores into the air currents to find new organic material to colonize.
So out in the woods, it's totally open, it's natural, it's just doing its job.
An essential ecological role, yeah. The fundamental danger to human health doesn't arise simply because mold exists. The danger is entirely a product of modern architectural physics.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when mold sporulates in a forest, those spores and the chemical byproducts they carry are instantly diluted by millions of cubic miles of atmospheric airflow.
Right, they just blow away.
Exactly. But when we build increasingly airtight, highly insulated homes, we create a closed-loop system. We take an organism designed to break down a forest, trap it inside a sealed box, and concentrate its biological output.
And not all molds are created equal either. I mean, I was looking at the taxonomy of these fungi in our sources, and there's a massive difference between like a mild annoyance and a systemic toxin.
Oh, absolutely. We really have to draw a hard line between allergenic molds and toxigenic molds. On one end of the spectrum, you have genera like Aspergillus or Penicillium.
Which are the common ones, right?
Yeah, very common. When a healthy immune system encounters spores from these molds, it recognizes a foreign particulate and mounts a localized histamine response.
So you sneeze, Your eyes water.
Right, maybe you get a scratchy throat, it's an allergic reaction. The spores themselves are the irritant.
Mm-hmm.
But toxigenic molds, like Stachybotrys tartarum, which is infamously known as toxic black mold, they operate on a completely different level of chemical warfare.
Right, because the spore is just the delivery mechanism for something worse.
Exactly. The real danger lies in what the mold synthesizes, which are secondary metabolites called mycotoxins.
Okay, I want to pause on mycotoxins because this is where the conversation really shifts from, I have a mold allergy to, well, I am being systematically poisoned. What exactly is a secondary metabolite in this context?
Well, a primary metabolite is something an organism produces that is essential for its basic survival and growth. Think of amino acids or simple sugars.
Okay, so just the basics of staying alive.
Right. But a secondary metabolite is a compound the organism produces to give it an evolutionary advantage, usually as a defense mechanism or a way to outcompete other organisms for resources.
Like a weapon.
Yes, exactly like a weapon. Mycotoxins are highly complex, lipid-soluble chemical compounds. We're talking about things like trochothecines, aflatoxins, and ochratoxins.
And they release these when they feel threatened.
Yes. When a colony of Stachybotrys feels threatened by other fungi or bacteria, it pumps out mycotoxins to kill off the competition. The problem is that human cellular machinery is just as vulnerable to these chemical agents as a competing fungus is.
It's like, it feels like an indoor campfire.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right, like if you're out in the woods and you build a campfire, it's natural, it's useful, and the smoke just dissipates up into the open sky. The ecosystem easily handles the load.
Yes, plenty of ventilation.
But if you take that exact same campfire and you light it in the middle of a perfectly sealed, hyper-insulated living room, suddenly you have a lethal situation.
You absolutely do.
The smoke, which in this analogy represents the spores and the mycotoxins, has absolutely nowhere to go. It just builds up, bounces off the drywall, gets pulled into the return vents, and cycles straight back into your lungs.
The physics of concentration makes that an incredibly apt comparison. And you have to remember, mycotoxins are astonishingly small.
How small are we talking?
Often measured in submicron levels, meaning they are much, much smaller than the spores themselves. They can travel attached to dust particles or simply ride the air currents as volatile organic compounds.
Just floating invisibly.
Right. And because we spend roughly 90% of our lives indoors now, you are essentially sitting in that smoke-filled room, breathing in recirculated chemical metabolites hour after hour, day after day.
Which means if this indoor campfire is so dangerous, we have to figure out exactly where the firewood is being sourced, right? We have to play hide and seek with the microclimates in our homes.
Yes, we do.
Because mold doesn't just spontaneously erupt in the middle of a dry living room rug. It requires very specific thermodynamic conditions to thrive.
Exactly. Mold has a fundamental biological requirement for water. The spores can actually lay dormant in extreme heat or freezing cold for years.
Wait, really? Just waiting?
Just waiting. But the moment the moisture content of an organic material hits a certain threshold, usually around 60% relative humidity at the surface, the spore awakens and hyphal growth begins. So we have to look for the microclimates created by our own structural designs.
Obviously we know bathrooms and kitchens are prime real estate for mold. Anytime you introduce a plumbing fixture or create steam, you alter the vapor pressure of that room.
Of course.
But I want to bypass the obvious water leaks and dig into the massive, often completely ignored danger zone that we actively wire into the blueprint of every modern home. The HVAC system.
Oh, yes. The heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system.
Right. But I have to push back on this paradox because an air conditioning system is fundamentally designed to condition the air by removing humidity.
It is.
It lowers the latent heat. So how can the very machine engineered to dry out the air be the primary engine for breeding and blasting mold throughout the house? I mean, how does that make any sense?
To understand the paradox of the HVAC system, we have to look really closely at the thermodynamics happening inside the air handler itself.
Okay, take me inside the machine.
The core component of an AC unit is the evaporator coil. When the system turns on, compressed refrigerant expands inside this dense network of aluminum fins.
Right.
And that causes the temperature of the metal to drop drastically, often plunging well below the dew point of the surrounding air.
And when warm, humid return air hits a surface that is below the dew point,
you get rapid, continuous condensation.
like a cold glass of water on a summer day.
Exactly like that. The physics are undeniable here. The coil strips the moisture out of the air by forcing it to condense onto the metal fins. The water then drips down into a condensate drain pan and is supposed to flow out of the house. But think about the environment you've just created inside that dark, enclosed metal cabinet.
It's wet all the time.
You have a perpetually wet surface. Now, factor in the airflow. The blower motor is violently pulling thousands of cubic feet of household air across these wet coils every single hour.
Wow.
And what is household air composed of?
Dust, dead skin cells, pet dander.
Microscopic organic debris, yes. That dust gets trapped in the condensation on the coils.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So now, you don't just have a wet piece of aluminum. You have a wet piece of aluminum coated in a rich sludge of carbon-based organic matter. You have provided a dormant mold spore with absolute darkness, constant hydration, and an endless buffet of food.
It's literally a bioreactor.
It becomes exactly that. A biofilm begins to form on the fins of the coil, the mycelial network takes root. And here is the truly insidious part.
What's that?
Once a toxigenic mold establishes a colony on the evaporator coil or inside the porous insulation of the plenum chamber, the HVAC system basically turns into a localized biological weapon.
Because it's connected to every room.
Right. Every time the thermostat clicks and the blower fan kicks on, it physically agitates the colony, launching millions of mycotoxin-laden spores directly into the high-velocity air currents.
That is terrifying.
The ductwork then acts as a superhighway, distributing these toxic secondary metabolites into every single room of your home simultaneously.
So it's actively weaponizing the air currents,
Yeah.
which begs the question, if we are constantly inhaling this, if the HVAC is just pumping these lipid-soluble mycotoxins into our bedrooms while we sleep, what is the physiological cascade happening inside the human body? Let's trace the biology of the siege.
Well, the initial point of contact is, of course, the respiratory mucosa.
The lungs and sinuses.
Yes. When you inhale mycotoxins, they first encounter the delicate epithelial tissue lining your sinuses and lungs. Clinical data consistently shows that mold exposure triggers an aggressive, localized inflammatory response.
So the body knows it's under attack.
It does. The mycotoxins deplete secretory IgA, which is the primary immunoglobulin responsible for mucosal immunity. Without IgA, your respiratory tract is left completely vulnerable.
And how does that manifest for the person experiencing it?
This presents as chronic, relentless sinusitis, asthmatic wheezing, and deep tissue inflammation in the lungs.
So you think you just have a stubborn respiratory infection or like allergies that won't quit?
Yeah.
But it's actually localized tissue damage from the toxin.
Exactly, but the lungs are really just the gateway. Because mycotoxins are highly lipophilic, meaning they dissolve in fats, they pass very easily through cellular membranes.
But they don't just stay in the lungs.
No, they enter the bloodstream and begin systemic circulation. And this leads to the most staggering impact of toxic mold exposure, which is the neurological damage.
Because the brain is made of fat.
The brain is incredibly rich in lipids. When mycotoxins circulate up to the brain, they easily cross the blood-brain barrier.
Now, this is where we get to the profound brain fog and cognitive decline we were talking about earlier. But how exactly does a fungus chemical cross the blood-brain barrier? I thought that barrier was designed to protect the brain.
It is designed to keep pathogens out, yes. But small, fat-soluble molecules like mycotoxins slip right through the endothelial cells.
Unbelievable.
Once inside the brain parenchyma, they trigger the brain's resident immune cells, which are called microglia.
Okay, what do the microglia do?
The microglia recognize a toxic invader and mount an aggressive defense. They release inflammatory cytokines. But because the mycotoxin exposure is continuous, remember, you're breathing it in every night, the microglia never turn off.
So the brain is just constantly inflamed.
You enter a state of chronic neuroinflammation. The neurons are bathed in inflammatory chemicals, which disrupts synaptic transmission and basically slows down your neural processing speeds.
I was reading in our sources about a deeply concerning manifestation of this chronic neuroinflammation that the clinical literature calls mood numbness.
Yes, mood numbness.
It seems to profoundly affect the limbic system, completely altering a person's baseline emotional state. What's the biological mechanism behind literally losing your emotions?
Mood numbness is a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying symptom. It often correlates with severe dysregulation of the HPA axis.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, right?
Exactly, which controls our stress response and our hormone production. The constant neuroinflammation places the brain in a state of perpetual low-grade survival mode.
It's just trying to survive the chemical fire.
Right. The body is expending so much metabolic energy fighting this invisible systemic chemical fire that it begins to downregulate non-essential functions. Dopamine and serotonin receptor sensitivities are altered.
So you just don't feel things as sharply.
The natural peaks and valleys of human emotion are simply flattened out to conserve energy. You aren't necessarily experiencing the acute sadness of clinical depression, but you lose the capacity for joy, motivation, and drive. You just feel emotionally gray.
You know, it reminds me of a computer virus.
How so?
Not the kind of ransomware that throws a giant red skull on your screen and locks you out of your hard drive where you know immediately that you're infected.
Right, a subtle one.
Instead, it's a highly sophisticated malware that silently installs itself in the background. It hijacks your processor to mine crypto or something, draining your battery twice as fast, causing your cooling fan to constantly run hot, and making all your other applications glitch and stutter.
That's a great way to picture it.
And you sit there staring at the screen thinking, man, my computer's just getting old. You adapt to the poor performance. But in reality, your system's resources are being entirely consumed by a hidden background process.
That analogy perfectly captures the mitochondrial impact of mycotoxins.
A mitochondria.
Yes. Inside almost every cell of your body are mitochondria, the organelles responsible for producing ATP, which is the fundamental energy currency of life.
The powerhouse of the cell, as we all learned in high school.
Exactly. Well, mycotoxins are notorious mitochondrial toxins. They disrupt the electron transport chain inside the mitochondria, physically halting the production of ATP.
So your battery actually is draining twice as fast.
Your battery is genuinely draining because your cells cannot generate energy efficiently. This is why the fatigue associated with mold toxicity is so crushing. It's not just a lack of sleep, it is cellular energy failure.
Wow.
And because the symptoms, the flat mood, the slight cough, the exhaustion are so chronic and low grade, people rationalize them. They never realize their biological hardware is glitching because of their environment.
And if our cellular hardware is failing because the environment is constantly bombarding us with oxidative stress, a doctor prescribing like a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor for the mood numbness or a corticosteroid inhaler for the lungs, I mean, that's just attempting to patch the software while the hardware is still on fire.
That's exactly what it is.
We have to address the physical environment first.
It is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite to healing. In clinical practice, the golden rule of mold toxicity is simple. You cannot detoxify a body that is still actively occupying the toxic environment.
Because the intake is higher than the output.
Right. You can take all the advanced binders and antioxidants in the world, but if you go back to sleep in a bedroom continuously fed by a contaminated HVAC system, you will never outpace the incoming toxic load.
So we have to tackle the house. We have to cut off the source.
Step one is always moisture detection and control. Remember, mold cannot initiate growth without a water anomaly.
So how do you find it if it's hidden behind a wall?
A professional environmental hygienist won't just look for black stains on the baseboards. They look for hidden thermal and moisture variances. They utilize infrared thermal imaging cameras to detect cold spots behind drywall.
Because cold spots indicate moisture.
Exactly, which indicates trapped moisture. And they use penetrating moisture meters to measure the exact water content of the structural wood.
So you find the leak.
If you have a slow pinhole leak behind a shower valve or negative grading outside forcing hydrostatic pressure through your basement foundation, you have to fix the water intrusion first. If you don't remove the moisture source, the mycelium will simply regenerate.
Now, once the moisture is handled, I want to look at the chemistry of actually destroying the mold colonies.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge debate about chemical fungicides versus natural solutions. Let's look at the cellular disruption. Why do certain household items work just as well or even better than industrial bleach on small areas?
Well, the issue with bleach, specifically sodium hypochlorite, is its ionic structure. Bleach is highly effective at oxidizing the surface layer of a non-porous material, like a tile.
Right?
Right. But its chemical structure prevents it from deeply penetrating porous materials, like wood or drywall.
It just sits on top.
It essentially burns off the surface, fruiting bodies of the mold, leaving the subterranean mycelial root network completely intact. Furthermore, bleach introduces a large amount of water to the material.
Oh, which is the one thing mold wants.
Exactly, which can actually feed the surviving roots.
So you're just giving the mold a haircut and a drink of water.
Precisely. However, when we look at the biochemistry of natural acids, the mechanics change entirely. Clinical studies focus heavily on the efficacy of acetic acid.
Which is just a standard household white vinegar, right?
Yes, white vinegar. Acetic acid is unique because it is both a weak acid and a highly penetrative solvent.
How does it work on the mold cell?
When applied to a fungal colony, the acetic acid molecule is small enough to penetrate the complex chitin structure of the fungal cell wall. Once inside, it lowers the intracellular pH of the mold cell.
It makes the inside of the cell acidic.
Right, which halts its metabolic processes and denatures its proteins, effectively killing both the surface mold and the underlying hyphae.
And what about the oxidative natural solutions, like hydrogen peroxide? I've seen that recommended a lot.
Hydrogen peroxide is a powerful oxidizing agent. When it contacts organic material, it rapidly breaks down into water and oxygen gas, releasing a massive burst of free radicals.
And free radicals are destructive.
Highly destructive. These free radicals aggressively attack the lipid bilayers of the fungal cell membrane, causing the cell to literally burst open. It is mechanical destruction at a microscopic level.
Wow.
Additionally, natural terpenes found in essential oils, such as terpenophorol in tea tree oil, act as lipophilic solvents that compromise the structural integrity of the fungal cell membrane, causing the cell's internal contents to just leak out.
Okay, I hear the biochemistry, and it's fascinating that acetic acid and terpenes can dismantle fungal cells so effectively. But I have to push back on the DIY approach here. Because if simple vinegar and tea tree oil are this scientifically validated at causing cellular death in fungi, why is there an entire multi-billion-dollar industry of professional mold remediation? Where is the line between a Saturday afternoon DIY spray bottle project and a hazardous materials situation?
That distinction is paramount and really comes down to the defense mechanisms of toxigenic mold and the physics of cross-contamination. Vinegar is highly effective for a localized patch of penicillium on your shower grout.
The easy stuff.
Right. But if you uncover a 3-foot colony of Stachybotrys chartarum colonizing the drywall behind your baseboards, you are dealing with a highly reactive defensive organism.
What happens when you spray a large colony like that with a bottle of vinegar?
Toxigenic molds have evolved to survive catastrophic environmental stress. When a large colony is threatened, whether by the physical friction of a scrub brush or the sudden introduction of a chemical solvent, it immediately engages an emergency survival response.
It fights back.
It rapidly sporulates. The colony will instantly eject hundreds of millions of spores and highly concentrated mycotoxins into the air to ensure its genetic lineage survives the attack.
Oh, man.
If you attempt a DIY cleanup on a large colony of black mold, you will trigger this massive spore release directly into your own breathing zone and into the ambient air currents of your home.
You're essentially detonating a biological bomb in your living room.
Exactly. You turn a localized problem into a systemic, whole-house contamination. Professional remediators do not just come in and spray chemicals, they manage the aerodynamics of the environment.
How do they do that?
Before a single piece of drywall is touched, they build physical containment barriers using heavy mill plastic, and they install industrial negative air machines equipped with HEPA filters.
Let's break down that negative air pressure. How does that prevent the spore bomb from spreading?
A negative air machine constantly pulls air out of the contained work zone, passes it through a HEPA filter, which captures particles down to 0.3 microns using mechanisms like interception and Brownian motion, and exhausts the scrubbed air outside the house.
Okay, so it's blowing air out the window.
Right. Because more air is being exhausted than supplied, the air pressure inside the containment zone drops below the pressure of the rest of the house.
Making it negative pressure.
Yes. This means that if a gap opens up in the plastic barrier, the air from your clean living room will rush into the dirty work zone rather than the toxic spores rushing out.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
It dictates the direction of the airflow, ensuring that when the mold defensive sporulates, the toxins are instantly sucked into the filtration unit rather than drifting into your kitchen.
Okay, so the physics of containment are just as important as the chemistry of the cleaning. Let's assume the remediation is complete. All right. The negative air machines have done their job. The water intrusion is fixed. The HVAC coils have been sterilized. The structural environment is finally a safe haven.
The house is clean.
The house is clean. Now we have to turn our attention inward. We have a body that has been accumulating lipophilic mycotoxins in its tissues and brain for years. How do we begin the physiological process of scrubbing these chemicals out of our own biology?
This is a highly nuanced physiological transition. Step 1 was neutralizing the external environment. Step 2 is a critical preparatory phase. We must forcefully activate the body's natural elimination pathways before we ever attempt an aggressive, targeted cellular detox protocol.
I want to focus on that sequencing. Why is it dangerous to jump straight into taking heavy binders or intensive detox supplements right away? Why can't I just take a pill to fix it?
We have to look at the pharmacokinetics of detoxification. If you ingest a powerful binding agent or an intracellular detoxifier, its job is to enter the deep tissues, mobilize the stored mycotoxins out of the fat cells, and pull them into the bloodstream for the liver and kidneys to process.
Sounds good so far.
But if your downstream exit routes, your excretory systems, your bile ducts, your lymphatic flow are sluggish or blocked, those mobilized toxins have nowhere to go. They hit a biological traffic jam.
So they just recirculate.
Worse than recirculate, they are pulled from inert storage in fat tissue and released back into active systemic circulation where they can cross the blood-brain barrier again or trigger a massive inflammatory cytokine storm.
Wow.
This is clinically known as a Herxheimer reaction or a severe detox crisis. The patient feels exponentially worse: fever, chills, debilitating brain fog, joint pain, because they have poisoned themselves with their own mobilized toxins. You must ensure the exit routes are wide open before you mobilize the threat.
I picture it like trying to sweep the dust out of a heavily neglected, dirty house.
Okay.
If you just grab a stiff broom and start sweeping furiously, but all the exterior doors and windows are dead-bolted shut, what are you actually accomplishing?
Oh, thank God.
Right. You're just violently kicking all the settled dust up into the air. It's going to choke you, irritate your lungs, and then eventually it's just going to settle right back down onto the furniture. You haven't cleaned anything. You've just relocated the toxic burden.
That's right.
You have to open the doors and windows first, create a draft, so the dust can actually be swept out of the structure.
That is a flawless mechanical representation of human detox physiology. And in our biology, our primary quote-unquote doors and windows are the eccrine sweat glands, the hepatic detoxification pathways in the liver, and the gastrointestinal tract.
Okay, let's go through those.
Let's look closely at the integumentary system, the skin. Sweating is an evolutionarily ancient, highly efficient pathway for excreting toxic waste, particularly lipophilic compounds that are difficult for the kidneys to process into urine.
But most of us live in perfectly climate-controlled 70-degree environments all year round. We rarely sweat naturally.
Exactly. We have largely bypassed our skin's excretory function through modern convenience. To reopen this pathway, the clinical data strongly advocates for hyperthermic conditioning, specifically dry saunas.
Why dry saunas over a wet steam room?
Well, a steam room is highly humid, which limits the evaporation of sweat from your skin. Evaporation is what cools the body. In a dry sauna, the ambient humidity is very low, allowing your body to sweat profusely to cool down the core temperature.
You just sit in there and bake.
Spending 20 to 30 minutes inducing a deep systemic sweat physically pushes water, urea, and stored lipophilic xenobiotics, including mycotoxins and environmental heavy metals, directly out through the pores. It bypasses the liver entirely. It offloads a massive amount of the toxic burden.
Okay, so we are sweating out the toxins through the skin. Now let's talk about the liver, the body's primary chemical processing plant. We need to talk about glutathione.
Oh, glutathione, yeah.
It gets thrown around a lot in functional medicine circles. But what exactly is the biochemistry of glutathione, and why is it the silver bullet for mold toxicity?
Glutathione, or GSH, is universally recognized as the master antioxidant of the human body. It is a tripeptide, meaning it is constructed from 3 amino acids, which are cysteine, glycine, and glutamine.
Okay.
What makes glutathione so biochemically powerful is the sulfur group attached to the cysteine molecule. Sulfur is incredibly sticky. It acts like biochemical flypaper.
So it physically grabs onto the mycotoxins.
Yes, it does. When lipophilic mycotoxins reach the liver, they must go through phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification.
How does that work?
In phase 1, enzymes modify the toxin to make it slightly more water-soluble, but this often makes the toxin temporarily more reactive and dangerous.
Like prepping it for removal.
Right. Then in phase 2, the liver uses glutathione to undergo a process called conjugation. The sulfur bond of the glutathione molecule physically attaches to the reactive mycotoxin.
And that neutralizes it.
This neutralizes the oxidative threat and transforms the molecule into a bulky, water-soluble compound that can now be safely excreted into the bile, dumped into the intestines, and eliminated in the stool.
But if we're dealing with a chronic mold exposure, the liver is processing thousands of these mycotoxins every single day.
And that is the crux of the issue right there. The liver burns through its endogenous glutathione reserves at an alarming, unsustainable rate. You become glutathione depleted.
And without the flypaper.
Once that happens, the liver loses its primary tool for conjugation, and the mycotoxins simply bypass the liver and circulate back into the tissues. We have to actively restock the liver supply.
How do we do that efficiently? Because I know oral supplements can be tricky when it comes to stomach acid destroying the peptides.
Oral delivery is challenging, yes. The hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes in the stomach will rapidly cleave the tripeptide apart into its constituent amino acids before it ever reaches the bloodstream.
So taking a pill might not work.
It's very inefficient. You can use liposomal glutathione, where the peptide is encapsulated in a microscopic lipid sphere, a fat bubble that protects it from the stomach acid and allows it to be absorbed into the lymphatic system.
Okay, that sounds better.
But there is another highly effective mechanism for bypassing the gastrointestinal tract entirely, which is transdermal absorption using a gluteal spray.
Spraying glutathione directly onto the skin. I mean, how does a complex molecule like that penetrate the epidermal barrier? I thought skin was meant to keep things out.
It requires strategic application. The stratum corneum, the outermost layer of the skin, is a formidable barrier. However, if you apply an aqueous gluteal solution to the softer, highly vascularized areas of the body, specifically areas of high friction where skin touches skin, like the inner thighs, the axillary region under the arms, or the inner forearms, the permeability increases drastically.
Because the skin is thinner there.
Thinner, and the blood vessels in these areas are very close to the surface. The glutathione is absorbed transdermally, entering the capillary beds and achieving direct systemic circulation without ever passing through the destructive environment of the gut.
So you combine that transdermal glutathione with intense hydration and trace mineral support to ensure the kidneys are flushing, and a daily sauna practice to keep the pores open, and you have successfully unlocked all the biological exit doors.
You really have.
For many people dealing with a mild to moderate exposure, this foundational protocol, clean the house, sweat, and support the liver, is enough to restore homeostasis.
It is highly effective for the vast majority of cases.
But sometimes, natural sweating and a bottle of vinegar just aren't going to cut it. I want to transition into the extreme end of the spectrum here. Let's talk about the catastrophic exposure scenarios. I was looking at a clinical case study regarding a family in Naples, Florida, who lived through a massive hurricane storm surge.
Yeah, that case study is a chilling example of acute, overwhelming environmental toxicity. We are talking about 2 properties that were inundated by a 5-foot wall of ocean water.
5 feet of standing water inside a residential structure.
Complete structural saturation. The drywall, the insulation, the cabinetry, the subflooring, all of it acted like a giant sponge. And in a warm, humid climate like Florida, fungal amplification happens within 48 hours.
That fast.
Yes. Even after the water receded and the initial physical debris was mucked out, the porous materials that remained were deeply colonized by toxigenic strains. The family, particularly the wife and daughter who were spending extensive time inside the property managing the cleanup, No, we're talking about profound neurological and systemic collapse, crushing migraines that didn't respond to medication, severe gastrointestinal paralysis, and massive endocrine disruption leading to sudden, erratic hormone dysregulation.
Their bodies just couldn't handle it.
They ran advanced mycotoxin urine panels and blood tests, which confirmed the diagnosis. Their tissues were flooded with astronomical levels of circulating mycotoxins.
And for an exposure of that magnitude, where the biological computer is essentially experiencing a hard crash, basic transdermal sprays and a 20-minute sauna aren't fast enough. The toxic load is outpacing the clearance rate.
Exactly.
This is where we have to look at aggressive advanced clinical intervention, what you might call the nuclear option.
When foundational detox fails, we move to advanced oxidative therapies. And the absolute cornerstone of this clinical approach, both for rapidly detoxifying the human body and sterilizing the deep structure of the home, is ozone therapy.
Let's do a deep dive into the chemistry of ozone. What exactly is it, and why is it so lethal to pathogens?
Well, the oxygen we breathe every second of every day is O2, a stable molecule consisting of 2 oxygen atoms covalently bonded together. Ozone is O3. It is an allotrope of oxygen containing 3 atoms. That 3rd oxygen atom makes the molecule highly unstable and incredibly reactive. In nature, it is formed in the upper atmosphere by ultraviolet radiation or at ground level during a lightning strike.
Which is why the air smells so crisp and electric after a thunderstorm.
That's the ozone, yes.
So it wants to get rid of that third wheel, basically.
Precisely. Ozone is desperately trying to return to its stable O2 state. When an ozone molecule encounters an organic pathogen, a virus, a bacterium, or the lipid envelope of a mycotoxin, it instantly donates that extra oxygen atom.
And what does that do?
This process is called ozonolysis. The reactive oxygen atom aggressively attacks the double carbon bonds in the lipid structure of the mycotoxin, physically cleaving the molecule apart. It is rapid, merciless molecular destruction via oxidation.
It's essentially biochemical warfare. So how do we safely harness an oxidative burst like that inside the human circulatory system?
In a clinical setting, medical-grade ozone is generated from pure oxygen tanks and administered through highly controlled protocols. One of the most powerful systemic methods is hyperbaric multi-pass ozone therapy, often referred to as the 10-pass method.
10-pass. What does the machine actually do?
A practitioner inserts an IV and draws roughly 200 milliliters of the patient's blood into a sterile glass vacuum bottle under negative pressure. Inside that bottle, the blood is mixed with a precise concentration of ozone gas.
Wow.
You can actually watch the dark, deoxygenated venous blood turn a brilliant, vibrant cherry red as it becomes super oxygenated, and the ozone rapidly neutralizes circulating pathogens and mycotoxins.
Right in the bottle.
Right in the bottle. Then, positive pressure is applied to push that purified blood back into the patient's vein. That is one pass.
And they do that 10 times in a single session.
Exactly. Pulling, ozonating, and returning the blood over and over. This creates a massive systemic oxidative burst that stimulates the body's own antioxidant enzyme systems, increases cellular oxygen utilization, and systematically destroys blood-borne mycotoxin.
That is intense. Are there other methods?
Another highly advanced method is EBOO, or extracorporeal blood oxygenation and ozonation. This is closer to a dialysis machine. Blood is pulled from one arm, continuously pumped through a specialized membrane filter where it is saturated with ozone and ultraviolet light, and immediately returned to the other arm. It treats a massive volume of blood in a continuous circuit.
Okay, pulling blood out of the body and running it through a machine is intense.
Yeah.
What about options that don't involve needles? I saw references to a transdermal machine called the HO-CAT.
The HO-CAT is an extraordinary piece of engineering. It stands for hyperthermic ozone and carbonic acid transdermal technology. It looks like an egg-shaped pod.
Like a sci-fi pod.
Sort of, yes. You sit naked inside the chamber with just your head poking out the top. The machine first floods the chamber with carbonic acid and steam. The carbonic acid mixes with your sweat to lower the skin's pH and massively dilate the pores and peripheral blood vessels.
It's opening the doors as wide as biologically possible.
Exactly. Once the pores are fully dilated, the machine pumps high concentrations of ozone gas into the chamber. Because the skin is highly vascularized and the pores are open, the O3 dissolves into the sweat and permeates the dermis, entering the lymphatic system and capillary beds.
Bypassing the lungs entirely.
Right. It provides the systemic oxidative benefits of ozone combined with intense hyperthermic sweating without requiring intravenous access.
All right, I understand the clinical application for the body, but we also have to talk about the house. Because the case study mentioned using massive ozone generators to treat the structural environment itself. The protocol involves sealing up the house, setting up machines that generate tens of thousands of milligrams of ozone per hour, and letting them run for 24 to 48 hours.
Yes, structural ozone.
But let's pump the brakes here.
I welcome the pushback.
We started this conversation talking about gently wiping down shower tiles with some diluted white vinegar. Now we are talking about flooding a residential home with a highly reactive, unstable gas that forcefully oxidizes organic material. The literature explicitly states that if you leave a dog, a houseplant, or a goldfish in a house during a high ppm ozone shock treatment, it will absolutely kill them. It destroys lung tissue.
It does.
So how does someone navigate the immense gap between natural remedies and deploying a lethal gas inside their living room?
It is a critical question, and the contrast is intentionally stark. High-concentration ozone shock treatments are strictly an extreme environmental measure for extreme circumstances. This is not for a bit of mildew around the bathroom fan.
Okay, so when is it used?
You deploy structural ozone when a home has suffered catastrophic water damage, or when you have a confirmed systemic infiltration of stachybotrys that has saturated the inaccessible cavities of the architecture. And you only do this when the home is completely evacuated of all biological life. Humans, pets, plants, everything.
So what exactly is the ozone doing to the house while it's empty? Why is it better than a chemical fogger?
The primary advantage of ozone over chemical fogs or synthetic biocide sprays is its molecular size and its behavior as a gas. A chemical fog consists of liquid droplets suspended in the air.
Like hairspray.
Gravity eventually pulls those droplets down, and they coat surfaces, leaving behind synthetic chemical residues, forever chemicals that you will continue to touch and inhale for months. Ozone is a true gas. It does not settle. It expands to fill the space uniformly.
Getting into every crack and crevice.
It permeates the microscopic pores of the drywall. It travels deep into the labyrinth of the ductwork and dissolves into the organic biofilms coating the HVAC coils. It can even penetrate the cellular structure of wooden subfloors.
It hunts the mycotoxins down at a molecular level, regardless of where they are hiding.
Exactly. The O3 oxidizes the fungal cell walls and cleaves the carbon bonds of the residual microtoxins. And the true beauty of ozone is its instability. After the machines turn off, the ozone begins to degrade. It has a half-life of about 20 to 30 minutes at room temperature.
So it just goes away.
Within a few hours, every single molecule of that highly toxic O3 gas has naturally broken down and reverted back into stable, completely breathable O2 oxygen. You are left with a biologically sterile environment and absolutely zero chemical residue.
Which gives the home a completely clean slate. And to protect that clean slate moving forward, especially in high-risk climates, we need to talk about permanently fortifying the HVAC system. You mentioned earlier that the evaporator coil is a bioreactor. How do we stop the colony from ever taking root again?
You have to alter the physics of the air handler. Upgrading to thick, pleated HEPA filters combined with activated carbon will physically trap the organic dust and neutralize volatile organic compounds before they reach the coil. But the ultimate fortification is integrating UVGI.
Ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. Installing UV lights inside the ductwork.
Specifically, UVC spectrum light, positioned directly over the evaporator coil. Mold and bacteria are highly susceptible to UVC photon energy. When the UV light constantly shines on the wet aluminum fins, the photons penetrate any microscopic spores that attempt to land.
And what does the light do to the spore?
The light physically damages the nucleic acids inside the spore, creating thymine dimers in their DNA sequence.
It scrambles their genetics.
It breaks their DNA so profoundly that they lose the ability to perform vital cellular functions or reproduce. The spore is rendered completely sterile and inert before it can ever initiate hyphal growth. The coil remains wet from condensation, but the biological threat is neutralized.
Whether it's a bottle of pantry vinegar breaking down chitin cell walls, or a complex extracorporeal blood ozonation circuit cleaving lipid molecules, the underlying thesis here is action. You cannot afford to be a passive participant in your own environment.
Passive acceptance of poor indoor air quality is a guarantee of chronic biological stress. Taking control of the microscopic environment is the foundation of macro-level health.
We've covered an immense amount of scientific ground today. We explored the evolutionary biology of fungi as nature's recyclers and how trapping them indoors concentrates their chemical warfare.
We did.
We dove deep into the thermodynamics of the HVAC system, transforming from an air conditioner into a systemic superspreader. We traced the path of lipophilic mycotoxins across the blood-brain barrier, analyzing how they trigger microglia, disrupt mitochondrial ATP production, and induce the terrifying reality of mood numbness.
It's a lot to process.
And most importantly, we broke down the chemistry of reclamation. You now understand how to safely disrupt fungal colonies using acetic acid, how to force open your excretory pathways using hyperthermic sweating and glutathione conjugation, and the profound power of oxidative ozone therapy for the most catastrophic exposures.
It is a dense, highly complex biological puzzle, but understanding the exact mechanisms of how mycotoxins operate removes the mystery from the suffering. When you understand the biochemistry, you are no longer flying blind. You have a definitive roadmap to reclaim your structural environment and your cellular health.
But before we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to turn over in your mind. We've established today that the entire reason mold transcends from a natural ecological decomposer into a lethal human toxin is because of the physics of concentration. The closed-loop, poorly ventilated nature of modern indoor living is the catalyst. The trapped air is the weapon. So, as we look to the future, as architectural codes demand, we build increasingly airtight, hyper-insulated, thermally sealed smart homes in a relentless pursuit to conserve energy and eliminate drafts. Are we inadvertently engineering the ultimate, inescapable incubators for an organism that has spent millions of years perfecting the art of chemical warfare? Next time you wake up feeling a little off, fighting that heavy brain fog, take a deep breath of that climate-controlled air and ask yourself, is it just a passing bug, or is the house breathing back? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.